Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everybody, and welcome to the best place on the internet today here on the OpenFeature YouTube and LinkedIn channels. It is I, your OpenFeature Community Manager, Andrew, joined by my fellow amazing OpenFeature governance team member, Mike Beamer. Mike, how is it going today for you?
That's going great. Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Not only because I get to be on camera with you again, because I'm really loving these like live opportunities to do this with the community out there, but also just, I mean, we only get to connect like once every couple weeks, so I love being able to do this. And also chatting with you and chatting with some other awesome people live on stream. How's the weather over there in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, looks decent. I haven't been outside today, to be honest.
I feel like it's like the starting of a conversation that like does not ever make sense for anybody that works from home. It's like, I've been at my computer since 8 a.m. So if you are new to the OpenFeature channels, welcome. And if you're brand new to the OpenFeature Contributor Spotlights, I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that is all about. And then we're going to bring on the subject of our spotlight in just a minute. So OpenFeature, if you don't know what we are an open spec for feature flagging. So OpenFeature's been around for a number of years. We're a cloud native computing foundation incubating project. And what does that mean? It means that we play with heavy hitters like Kubernetes and try and make your life as a software developer easier by making feature flagging more accessible for anybody that's looking to implement feature flags into their code base. Now, we do that as members of sort of the community team and the governance team, but you can't have an open spec, you can't have an open standard if it isn't for contributors that are actually helping to make this standard grow and become evolved by even larger audiences around the world. And so a couple months ago, we decided to start this Contributor Spotlight series, which started out as a blog post that was sort of introducing some awesome contributors to the world and showcasing some of the things that they've done and giving them a platform, a stage to share their love of open source and open feature and their languages and frameworks. And that's kind of evolved into live streams. If you follow me over on the Dev Cycle channels, you'll know that I love doing these live streams, and Mike has been on a number of other ones that I've done on the open feature community, but we really wanted to bring that to the open feature community and let people have some chances to shine. So today's spotlight is going to be shining on Max VelDink, our second ever community contributor spotlight feature. I'm going to bring Matt. I could do like an amazing introduction, but I feel like I've done a pretty good job so far, and I've been talking too much for a man that is trying to give the stage to our contributors. So I'm going to pull Max on. Max, how is it going today, sir?
Hey, it's going well, Andrew. You didn't get to the weather question yet, but in Florida, it's always 85 degrees-ish. So it's actually pretty nice outside right now.
There we go. I am actually incredibly jealous anytime that I talk to somebody from Florida when it's really good weather. And then I realize that good weather is also has hurricanes and tornadoes.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there is that.
Pretty active trade-off this year, but some years it's okay.
Amazing. Well, Max, I'm so thrilled to have you on the stream today, and obviously congratulations and thank you for everything that you've done to kind of support OpenFeature, and thanks for being here on the stream. And speaking of streams, before we kind of jump into things, I've heard that you have your own channel where you do streams as well.
Yeah, I would call that an alpha channel if we're going to use programming terminology. It's something I've enjoyed doing. So I think one of the easiest ways to mentor and to teach others is just to like see a software engineer working, right? No matter where you're at on the spectrum of career advancement, right? Because I learned the most from just watching folks like 2, 3, 4 skip levels ahead of me solving problems, and that is the preferred way that I like to teach my team and mentor my team. And so I've been trying out how do we, what does that look like? Not, for a specific company, but just in general for myself, And OpenFeature is actually a really good project to do because there's an established community there. We've got active problems to work on in the Ruby SDK / always something to be doing. And so it's actually like they pair really well. So I did my first couple of weeks ago, got hit by a hurricane, hoping to actually do one tomorrow night. Fingers crossed.
I love it. This is like some solid foreshadowing. It's almost like we talked about that we were just going to be talking about some of the other stuff that we were doing here. So amazing. I love it. And so if you're just tuning in now, you'll get an idea of kind of what's in store for our stream today. So I need to change our little setup here because Mike and I are pretty prominently featured here. We're not the important ones that are on this stream. And I'm still, why am I here? I should be over here. There we go. We got there. Yeah, I mean, I guess we should probably start with, same as we did kind of in the blog post, with some introductions. I think we'll give you the stage and then Mike and I can kind of say a little bit about ourselves afterwards. But yeah, Max, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my day job, I work for a company called JustWorks. We are a payroll software company, provide payroll benefits, HR support, primarily targeted at small businesses. Think like 1 to 10 folks. We can obviously go up more than that, but we're really trying to cater to that segment of the population where, payroll, you have like ADP, TriNet, big players. They really don't play down there because for them, it's seen as like a loss leader, right? And for us, it's our bread and butter. So we very excited about what we do and the types of folks that we get to work with on our platform. I focus in day to day on payroll and tax software. So making our payroll stack better, keeping up with tax changes across many different jurisdictions, which is, a ton of fun to a certain type of person. I kind of enjoy it. So that's my day job. I've been there about 3 years. Very, very excited about working there. And then over the past year or two, I've started to try to do a few open source things. So OpenFeature, I think we can talk about that specifically in another question you've got, Andrew. But I've been involved in that project about a year now, Mike, in some change-ish. And then before that, there's a Ruby type checker called Sorbet. And I've been a pretty active contributor, not to Sorbet, but to kind of the environment around it. So we use Sorbet at JustWorks. We have a lot of good tools that we've built. And then I've been trying to find the open source version of those and push those out so other people can leverage them as well.
Love that. Amazing. Well, Max, I think that sort of sets the stage for a lot of our conversations around open source, that it might be trending in the Ruby space, which I love. And I did an introduction before for me, so maybe I'll throw the introduction up to our kind of final camera feature up here, Mike.
Yeah. So I'm Mike Beamer. I live in the Detroit area. I work for Dynatrace and been on the governance committee basically since the beginning of the project. So just really happy to be kind of part of these things. It's really nice to be able to chat with people like Max, and like I actually got to meet him in person. Maybe we can talk about that later in the stream too, but just pretty cool opportunities to like meet people that are in totally different states, work on open source projects remotely, and then sometimes meet them in person. So yeah, happy to be here and definitely happy to have Max on the stream as well.
I love that. Well, let's take advantage of these of the stream, and we'll go off script. Even not that there's a script. There is no script if you're watching chat. But let's maybe talk about that experience where you guys got to connect in person, and that'll probably have a thread through. But I'll also say to anybody who's watching the stream right now, if you've got questions that you want to ask Max, feel free, throw them over into chat. We'll talk about them, and if you've got questions later, this is going to be saved onto YouTube, and so you can go over there and ask questions, and then we'll obviously make sure that those questions get over to Max. So maybe Mike introduced it, that like in-person introduction. Max, where did that happen? Like, how did that in-person connection between you and Mike happen?
Yeah, it was, I think serendipity is a really good word here. The RailsConf this year was in Detroit, which was my first time going to Detroit. I think it was in May this year, sometime around there. And so I discovered that, I forget how it happened, Mike. I think I mentioned like we're going to promote OpenFeature at RailsConf, and then you were just like, that's down the road because you live nearby, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
And there's a third player in this story, Jose, who used to work at Dynatrace, I believe, who now works for Gusto, which is our loving competitor in the payroll space. But he had started the Ruby SDK originally, him and another gentleman, Josh Nichols, both at Gusto. And so he was also nearby as well for RailsConf because Gusto had a booth there. So we just met up afterwards at one of the local bars in Detroit, and a couple other guys there, and it was good. It's one of the few like virtual spaces leaking into the real world in like a pretty seamless way.
That's awesome. And if people are not aware of what RailsConf is, what is RailsConf?
Sure. RailsConf, it's actually the second to last year this year of it being the one of two conferences that Ruby Central, who is kind of the I don't want to say governing body, but like open source, Center for Excellence organizations we have in the Ruby space and NA. The host RubyConf and RailsConf, they've decided to go all in on RubyConf, which is actually happening fairly soon as well. And there won't be another RailsConf after the next year, but it was just a gathering of all folks interested in the Ruby on Rails framework. So you had Ruby talks, you had open source in Rails talks. I guess to be very explicit, Rails is, the de facto web framework that many large companies use, which has been around for about 20 years now. So very established piece of software, very large community around it. But don't worry, there's another conference called Rails World, still an option if you are super into Rails. Yeah.
So Max, you obviously are super into Rails. I'm really curious. I always am fascinated by like the origin story of people's like preferred programming languages. How did you land in the Ruby ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my first language I actually started with was PHP, just ripping Drupal and WordPress plugins for pay when I was in high school, right? So that was kind of my introduction to just, you type some stuff in a box and suddenly your website works, and had an opportunity there with a good friend to mentor me there and just kind of teach me a lot about not only PHP, but just like SDLC, what it's like to work for a company, all that good stuff. And I went to college in the Florida State University, and the curriculum in college is very much focused on, at least computer science, a very like academic perspective on programming, which is, as you guys both can attest, not probably what you're going into unless you're going into algorithm development at Google or a FANG company, right? And so I kind of desired a little bit more of what I experienced, working in high school. So I actually went to a company called Ramsey Solutions up in Nashville, Tennessee, and just so happened that we were the largest Rails shop in the area. There was a couple of other like pretty big Ruby scene in Nashville proper and in the Southeast right there. But we just had the most developers working on Rails actively. And so I imagine like most folks, it was kind of the first major language framework I was exposed to, and just kind of like my root language, so to speak, where it's just, even if I've been using Golang, or if I have to go over to Kotlin or something, I still think in terms of Ruby and like translate it in my head to, okay, and this is how you'd write it in Golang, and vice versa. So pretty much circumstances led me to it. The reason I still love it and champion it and enjoy writing inside the Ruby space is just a fun language to work in. There's I think it is a hard first language to learn because it skips a lot of not skips, but a lot of foundational parts are a little bit more esoteric, and the whole like magic conversation around, well, Rails is just doing all this stuff for you. Like, it's really easy to skip a lot of like HTTP basics and stuff when you start with Rails, and it's just magically rendering views and getting your data out of the database for you. So it's like the double-edged sword, so to speak, of yes, it's very productive to get something shipped and you can start running pretty far in that direction. But then a lot of folks that only know Rails, and I think this applies to anyone who only knows a web framework in other languages, you miss out on some basic stuff that you kind of have to go in do a little bit of work, fill in some of those knowledge gaps in order to lift the ceiling up on your progression, right? But I still think Rails is the fastest way to get an idea out there and just start, validating something, seeing what people will pay for something, experimenting, prototyping internally. We see really good success with just getting things shipped really fast with it, paired with mentoring, teaching, having folks understand what Rails is doing and what it's doing for them is key, and really understanding the conventions there. You kind of have to have both of those things to be successful for like a long duration Rails project.
I love that. Yeah, I had my first foray into Rails. I do like a Friday series where I like try and add open feature things into different frameworks, and I was playing around in Rails, and yeah, it's super straightforward if that's where your brain is at that time. But I started in the PHP world, but my world lives in Laravel, and so like I try and translate everything over that way. So I definitely feel you there. Michael, what's your language? What's your go-to, or what's your preferred space?
I like TypeScript, so that's definitely what I prefer. I guess that's my home language. I tried to help out with some of the Ruby pull request reviews and stuff, but yeah, I mean it's relatively easy to read, but I don't think I'd be able to write it right now, to be honest. So
that's about where I was. I was like, I can get the SDK probably working in here, but I'm not going to understand any way what I'm doing.
At least we got the release pipeline working though, so that was a big win for us.
Yeah.
Once Max and I were like chatting over Slack, one evening, and it took a little bit, but we got it all released. So that was probably the most interesting part of the Ruby ecosystem from my very limited perspective, I guess. Here is their their publishing infrastructure is pretty cool. I was pretty impressed on how that all worked.
And Ruby is one of the few languages too where you can just start writing English and get to a runnable program at some point, which I've always hyped as like, okay, you can just kind of like think onto the programming screen, and then with some refactors and operationalizing and productionizing something, you can get something out. But it like really focuses on like, okay, I'm thinking this, and I can probably write something that kind of looks like what is actually the Ruby program we're going to run at the end of the day here.
I'm super impressed that there are still languages out there that can do it. It seems like, yes, we're going abstraction, but engineers like to engineer and over-engineer. So being able to build something human readable in like a really impactful way, I think is like a super compelling reason to play around in the Ruby ecosystem. So speaking of ecosystems, so obviously early days you got connected into the Ruby ecosystem. How the heck did you land in OpenFeature?
Yeah, so OpenFeature was a suggestion about, let's call it like a year and a half ago now, because time is fast, from our principal engineer at JustWorks, Andrew Buchanan, who came to us from ThoughtWorks, who had Pete, I think, worked with him at ThoughtWorks, who's just another, I think he's still on the board of OpenFeature. I actually don't know his capacity right now.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, and so we just connected up with him, and we were, as backstory, looking to pick, the original conversation was picking a feature flag vendor at JustWorks that we could rally behind, make flags cross technology, cross service, all that good stuff you get with a vendored service. And as a part of that conversation, our Rails monolith had, I think, 3 different ways of doing feature flagging at that point in time. And that was before we were going to add the vendor. And it was just very confusing which one you were supposed to be using at any given time, right? There was really no guidance. And so it was kind of like a Wild West, and you just had all sorts of approaches there. So while we were looking in the vendor conversation, we kind of started this side path of, okay, well, once we pick a vendor, we got to have guidance on how to implement, Confluence page, docs, all that good stuff, internal documentation. And Andrew was like, Pete's been working on this thing called OpenFeature. It might actually serve us really well here, because it not only gives us that flag evaluation layer, which is what we're looking for, it also gives us a bit more resiliency to not only vendor change, but also to our existing systems, where we can we don't have to say wait until we go to LaunchDarkly, which is the vendor we ultimately picked, but you can do it now, right? And we can kind of hide implementation details from you. So that's where it started with a call with Pete, and then we, myself and another staff engineer, evaluated the project, kind of saw where it's at. That's where we discovered the Ruby SDK was unlisted, but on the project org, and had some commits to it. And I think for like basic spec functionality, it was there, right? Like it was working. Some of the things that we needed that it was missing were the evaluation context, the idea of, I think they're called domains now, used to be called named clients. And one other thing that we needed that's escaping my mind. But at that point, we didn't know like anything about the governance or the project management or anything like that. So we decided to just write our own in-house implementation of the OpenFeature spec using sorbet flavored Ruby. So we had that type checker in there, which is a whole nother conversation, but slightly different than just a like base Ruby SDK. But one of the things that really attracted me to OpenFeature was in the first place is the project really focuses on the specification first and not necessarily the technology, which is just the web standards approach to things. But that allowed us to get really far with, like, I want to call it 8 hours of dev work from myself, just implementing the spec in a reusable thing that we could use, and then moving our current flag implementations into providers and using that interface and just getting it like worked up really quickly. And so being able to like start from the spec actually gave us a lot of gas. And I know I've been talking for a minute, but finally, let's call it when I came back from paternity leave, which was in February of this year, we decided that instead of maintaining our own SDK, we were going to rally behind the canonical OpenFeature one, because we were using the other language clients and we just needed to upstream what we were doing. So we weren't maintaining a fork, essentially. And that's where I really started to get some commits in there, try to get us to, like, we are not fully spec compliant, but we are a usable flag evaluation mechanism. So let's get out there. We've got the official LaunchDarkly provider now. So we were able to delete a lot of internal code, or we'll be able to when we like fully move over. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Wait, am I right in assuming that sorbet is like Ruby's answer to TypeScript?
Sort of. It is one of the answers to TypeScript. There's a more official one that ships called RBS, which is the default way of adding type information to Ruby files, and it is a little, this is my opinion now, a little unwieldy, right? Because you need to maintain a whole separate set of files that mirror your current project structure, which just becomes untenable, especially like porting to it. And then you've had a couple other ones over the years. Steep comes to mind as another one. Sorbet is from Stripe, and it solves a lot of the problems that a lot of large Rails shops have, where we've got a 12-year-old code base with hundreds of contributors that have varying levels of Ruby and Rails knowledge, right? And like, what's the best way to progressively add typing a la TypeScript, right? And how can we do it in a way that allows you to actually like have the signatures next to the method, so it's conceptually compact, right? Like it's right there. The type checker can say, oh, okay, you're wrong, right? You're returning nil here when you tried to guarantee that you were returning something else. It just like ends a whole set of bugs that statically typed language enthusiasts are just, they laugh at you when you tell them about it. But it's just like, yeah, we eliminate a whole host class of things and we can roll it out progressively to our monolith. It's just a really good space, good complement.
Very cool. So Mike, this may be your answer. You may be able to switch over to Ruby if TypeScript, if you want to make the switch away from JavaScript into...
Yeah. Once JavaScript is irrelevant, maybe I'll switch to Ruby. And just Max, you do have some training videos too, don't you? You created some like Udemy courses
Yeah.
on Ruby, so maybe that's where I can learn.
Wow. You guys are just plugging all of my stuff that I wasn't even prepared to plug. Yeah, there is a Udemy course. I can give you the link after this, Andrew, if you want to share it.
Yeah, please.
It's if you are interested in learning the basics of sorbet and just kind of as a it's an aid with the official documentation, right? So I would, if you're interested, definitely would check out sorbet.org. That's a good starting place. Good docs there. The Slack community, very friendly. Usually get a reply in a couple of minutes, maybe from myself. But I created a course specifically for our internal customers at first, which was we have around 200 developers, and as we were rolling sorbet out, there's just a lot of, I don't want to call it confusion because people understood what we were doing, but just there's a lot of things you have to learn, right? You have to do build files called RBI files that complement your vendor gems that you're pulling in, right? And you need to understand the difference between runtime sorbet and static sorbet, which is running in the background and not actually affecting your runtime calls. And those are like two subtle, very different things. And so it started as a resource for them, gave a series of internal talks around that. And then it was kind of my first foray into, okay, well, we've got all this content. It is useful outside of what we do at JustWorks. And so I spent about 2 months longer than I anticipated, but a good chunk of time last year turning those into a Udemy course, trying to figure out like, how do we, what's the flow here? Do you do examples? Do you do like how much live coding do you do versus slides and stuff like that? So it was a great learning experience. I'm pretty okay with the quality that it turned out. I have plans to re-record them with what I have learned since then. And we have plans, by we, I mean me, to like record a more advanced series of like, okay, if you've adopted sorbet and things are going great, let's start to dive into some more of the advanced tooling in the ecosystem that's actually going to give you a lot more like type guarantees, right? So now that you've eliminated the certain class of bugs that sorbet is helping you catch, the easy stuff, right? How do you actually turn into using a type system first and thinking about types in your code base versus just using sorbet to catch incorrect method types, right? So yeah. I will send the link after this.
So, totally unrelated, but do you have any idea why it's called sorbet? Like, it seems like a really random name for a type checker.
I feel like I should know the answer to that, and they've probably there's a series. It's been around for about 6 years, and there's a series of Ruby and Rails conf talks where that team at Stripe was starting to promote it and premiere it. Maybe they mentioned why they called it that. I don't know, but the knock-on effect is most of the tooling in the ecosystem is based off of desserts, right? So you've got sorbet, obviously, and then you've got tapioca, which is from Shopify, which is a basically, I think they describe it as a Swiss Army knife, but it's just a series of tools that makes using sorbet easier, right? So they've just done some Shopify, big proponent of sorbet. They've got a lot of tooling to aid with it. Those two projects are pretty close to each other at this point. But then you can do a lot of like puns and stuff, right? So I'm working on a web framework that is completely sorbet focused called SoftServe. There's a couple of other like Spoon and all sorts of dessert stuff. So it's fun.
I will say if you're watching and you're like looking up all of these things that Max is talking about, the logo designs for all of these are super cute. Like
Yep.
Shopify's tapioca is like obviously very close to the sorbet kind of happy face style logo. Like they're very cute. I love it. I absolutely love it. So if you're watching this stream, by the way, and you're like, why does this seem to not be an OpenFeature stream, but this is a Ruby stream on the OpenFeature channels, you may be correct. And I want to get to why that is in just a second, but I have a question for you, Mike. So is this like this pathway that Max got into OpenFeature, is this common where like a company is kind of coming, or somebody at a company is coming in and developing stuff and then contributing, or was this kind of a unique pathway into the project?
No, it's quite common. I mean, we started with a couple like hate to call them core languages, but I don't really have a better word for it. So we went with things like, Java, Go, and Node, TypeScript, started with that, and then had the spec, so it hopefully covered as many of like the edge casey, use cases as possible for these different languages and how they behave. And then, yeah, we're just kind of left it open. So it was like, we've had a couple, like even like the Elixir one, which isn't even on our website yet, was like just a contributor that found the spec, was passionate about the language, and started helping to contribute. Same with like Rust and some of these other ones, where I think like the core or like the initial like founding group maybe doesn't have experience with those languages. So really to like, I think, do a good job, we need to rely on people that are, passionate kind of domain experts to kind of help us out. And then hopefully everyone can, use these SDKs and then benefit. So yeah, really kind of an ideal situation.
I love that. Have you used Elixir before? That's a scary language. Whew. I mean, I'm not scared by many programming languages, but like Phoenix Elixir, like their main web framework it's like every battery included, AA, AAA, like all the batteries you didn't even know you needed. It's a reason why things like Rails, I think, and Laravel and Next.js and React, I think, have been so successful. Is like the accessibility is awesome there. But I'm not hating on any of you Elixir devs out there.
Well, do you know the connection to Elixir and Ruby? Just to bring it back to Ruby.
I love that you're doing this. Yes, Max, what is the connection?
So the creator of Elixir, the Elixir is very, like, if you look at Elixir syntax, just like cursory, it looks like Ruby, right? They're using a lot of the same idioms, early return or implicit returns, def, everything. The creator, Jose Valim, was on the Rails core team circa 2016, 2015, a long time ago. I believe his company had a hand in Devise and our like main authentication frameworks and stacks in Rails. So longtime Rails contributor, somehow found the Beam or an Erlang, which is an old, is it from Nokia? It's from a telecom company for managing like network phone switches, right? And very focused on fault tolerant, high concurrency throughput, all of those good things that most scripted languages are not good at, right? And so he kind of married Ruby, Rails, the whole like human focused, batteries included nature into the Beam and built on top of it, and just kind of went from there, and was getting really into pattern matching, functional programming, pattern matching, which Ruby actually incorporated in like Ruby 3, I think 3.1. So yeah, there's a really close relationship there. And then Chris McCord, the creator of Phoenix, often cites Rails as a lot of the inspiration, Laravel as a lot of the inspiration. So it's kind of like a continuous loop of different language communities seeing cool stuff in other language communities and being like, well, why couldn't we do that, right? Or why don't we have that thing? I think Laravel is actually a really good like spearhead, because the stuff that Taylor Otwell has done there just has like all sorts of ripple effects. And at a lot of the Ruby conferences this year and for the past couple of years, there's been a lot of conversations of just like, have you seen the cool stuff that Laravel's doing? Like, why don't we do any of that cool stuff? And I think you're seeing a lot more of like web framework resurgence because of that.
I love that. And I love that everything comes back to Ruby. That makes me so happy. I'm just going to title, when I put this out, I'm just going to title this Ruby Does OpenFeature, or OpenFeature Does Ruby. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the whole Ruby conversation, because one of the things that you brought up in sort of the blog post you wrote was the kind of underrepresentation of Ruby in the cloud native space. And I know that's not hating on the cloud native space for not having it at all. It's more just sort of it is an underrepresented language. So I'm super curious, like, obviously that played into a decision to you, kind of contributing to this, to like share a little bit more on that than maybe what I did.
Yeah. Before I get messages about like, we use Ruby every day at the Fang company I work on, I think it's just a general observation, right? Because there's a lot of CNCF projects that you look at, they're like, oh, that's a good idea, right? And the ones where it actually has like a language implementations aspect to it, Ruby is either not represented or is represented by, here's this guy's personal project that implements the the Ruby library, or it's some like esoteric like Google link from like a long time ago. And yeah, so like just like anecdotally, you see that a lot. And I don't really know why. I have a couple like guesses there, right? Like a lot of CNCF projects start in Fang spaces, which either are on the JVM in some capacity or are using Golang or using something else, right? Like you're not really picking Ruby if you're working for an enterprise typically, right? And Rails and Ruby have been iterating on their own path for a really long time. And I don't want to call our community insular or like Ruby and Rails is insular because, you know, we're open to anyone joining. We love when new people join and stuff like that. But we've kind of had our like things, you know, like capital T things for a long time, right? Like our, this is how you do web frameworks in Rails, right? Or it's Rails. And like there's a couple other options, but you're probably using Rails. And like this is how you do authentication, or like here is how we do OpenSSL or something like that, right? Not necessarily those are CNCF projects, but we have our like long-standing things. Flipper comes to mind. That's a long-standing Ruby-focused feature flagging system, which has various levels to it of where the flags live. The UI gets mounted as a Rails dashboard. So all of our ecosystem just kind of works together, right? And because of that, there's good and bad, right? One, you have really battle-tested software. So Rails is good because it has been a web framework for 20 years. And the core of Rails, the ORM, the way we handle request response threads, the way we handle even like WebSocket connections and background job processing nowadays, those are all kind of solved. And like we're making performance gains and we're like ripping out some deprecated things. Those things don't change year to year, right? Like a lot of the new in Rails 7 and Rails 8 has been focused on the front end story, some of the newer like backing technologies that 37 Signals has been working on, but it's very rarely like we're changing how active record works, which is our ORM, right? And that's good because it's great battle tested software. Where it becomes a problem is most times you're not just using Ruby and Rails by itself anymore, right? Like even at JustWorks, our monolith is starting to be run inside of a Kubernetes cluster with sidecar dependencies on some sort of gateway on XYZ on like EKS managed Kubernetes, right? And like that's where CNCF kind of butts heads with the Ruby space because, you know, we want to deploy in a certain way. Rails wants you to deploy it in a certain way. But if we don't have the connecting tissue to a lot of the benefits you get from just like OpenTelemetry and some of the other sidecar services that you just get for free with Kubernetes, it just becomes like harder to get into that space and to play well with others, right? And so we, like one of the challenges is this is a personal challenge, I guess, is I want to make Ruby a good pick, right? So like the rest of your development team doesn't roll their eyes at you when you're like, we're bringing this Rails monolith or this Rails service into the Kubernetes ecosystem. And I don't want people to like groan and just be like, now we got to figure out how we're going to like make this thing work and connect with all of our Golang services. They should work really well. Like the promise of the cloud and containers is like, it should be like pretty easy to slot whatever else in. And so like participating as a Ruby contributor in CNCF projects is just like a small bridge there of just like building the tools that you wish you had and you wish were just standard there. And hopefully other people start to benefit from it as well.
Amazing. I think that's such a it's such a great reason aside from just contributing to open source. Like I think that focus on really like finding that glue and making this a really attractive option for folks in the space is super compelling. I really want to go and dive into Ruby again after this conversation. Like I probably won't. Well, I say that. I want to go find like a Ruby micro framework. That's the thing that I like doing. I like finding these like really underappreciated like micro frameworks of languages and then like showing them some love. I found like Rails has got a lot of stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's always nice to showcase some of the other ones.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what I'll do.
You've got a couple of options there, Andrew. You can do Sinatra, which is about as bare bones as you're going to get. That's been around for a long time as well, right?
All right.
That's basically a wrapper over rack, which is how we handle requests and responses. So like You do that with a web server, you got a web app. And then there's another interesting one called Hanami that's been, just iterating, pushing forward, doing its thing. Much more of a functional focused web framework where very similar to Phoenix kind of and how it treats request responses, has a whole separate like ORM/data mapping story than Rails does. So there are like other entry points. And if you just want to play in the Ruby ecosystem, we'd love to have you. And Rails is not the only way to do something of like value there. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And now I will also say, like, what if I wanted to try out SoftServe? Because you talked about SoftServe earlier, this web framework that you're building. Is it in like alpha, beta? Is there like a piece of code that I can go and look at, or is it still in the mind's eye?
What's before alpha?
Pre-alpha.
Pre-alpha. It's it is pre-alpha on my machine right now. So we use Rails, right, at JustWorks, but we use a lot of sorbet dependencies that I've been working on. So one is called sorbet result, which is to get like super nerdy now, result monad implementation using the sorbet type system. So it gives you like generic parameters, access to method chaining, all the stuff you would expect if you're using a result monad from Rust or from Golang's got a couple of implementations there, right? So that's one thing. That's the basis for a lot of stuff. And then we have another thing called sorbet schema, which is how we handle deserialization and serialization from various flat formats. So that's really inspired by Serday from the Rust community, which basically gives you a type-safe way to take in a blob of JSON or YAML or XML or CSV, perform validations, and then transform it into an operational struct that you can actually pass through the rest of your system. So those are like the two base libraries that SoftServe is based off of. And SoftServe just takes it one more step where we apply both of those things to the idea of a request response cycle. And so we basically handle the unmarshalling and marshalling of JSON for you, have some HTTP transforms in there, wrap rack, which is the Ruby request library that pretty much every other web framework uses so that we are compliant with middlewares from other stacks. And so it's a large experiment right now because I don't know if it's actually going to be as productive as a Rails or anything like that. But for us, it gives us a lot of type safety in a way that no other web framework has in the Ruby land, right? And I guess one more dependency I'll mention. So sorbet result, sorbet schema, sorbet HTTP, those are all libraries available for anyone to use right now. And I basically take learnings from JustWorks and we're upstreaming when we can. But sorbet HTTP basically gives you really strong HTTP types on top of sorbet. So right now it's basically status code transforms, right? So okay is 200, right? And like gives you that level. But a lot of the things that are in SoftServe are actually going to get upstreamed into HTTP. So if you're just doing any sort of HTTP client, you could use that package as well.
Love it. Things to keep an eye out for if you're following Max in all these different places. SoftServe coming soon to a Ruby project near you.
To Ruby Central near you,
or
Ruby
Central near you. I love it. Yep. You'll have to share more about that. So we're like kind of rocking through this time. You said it earlier, like time flies. But I don't want to end this stream without kind of talking about advice that you might have for folks that are looking to get started contributing, particularly in the open feature space. So obviously you've got a huge wealth of experience in terms of contributing in open source, but I'm super curious, like what would be your advice for folks that are looking to contribute and are considering open feature as a place to do that?
Yeah, so I think generally the like truism where you read more code than you write is still like 100% true all the time, right? So it's like 80-20 or whatever the percentage ends up being on any given year. But the easiest thing to do is just start reading one of the open feature SDKs, right? And actually, before you do that, the specification might be a good place to start. I actually tell my engineers this, like if they're interested in open feature, it's actually a really good, I don't want to say it has boundaries, but it's like a really well-defined box, right? Like the project's done a good job of saying, this is our specification. And this is, if you implement these requirements, then you have an OF compliant thing. And for a lot of our engineers, it's kind of their first brush with a like web standard, right? So you point someone at the HTML specification or the, I don't know, HTTP transport specification, right? Those are like both gnarly and very large, hard to consume, but that's how most of our tooling is built nowadays. And then if you look at OpenFeature, it's getting longer, but it's still pretty easy to like read it in an hour or less than an hour, right? So even if you don't fully understand it, I think it helps people unlock the idea that it's not just like technology is not unknowable, right? Like everything we do is knowable. You can read it. It's all English. So if English is your first language, you're good, right? Like you understand what it is. You probably could see how to like implement something like from scratch in whatever language you're most comfortable in. And I feel like that gives you a little bit of confidence to be like, okay, this is knowable. And then if you're interested in going further, then pick the SDK of your language of choice, right? So if it's Ruby, I would love for you to look at the Ruby SDK. See, we've got a few issues that anyone can jump in on. All the projects are that way, right? If Python's your thing, we just released the Python one before the Ruby SDK, and that one's going really well too. So chances are nowadays your language is probably represented like Elixir, right? Like it's a pretty, I don't want to say niche, but like smaller community, and that's starting to get representation. So yeah, just start with reading it, start with trying to understand the spec. And then at least for like the Ruby SDK side of things, there are like whole swaths of the spec we just don't have implemented yet, right? Like there's a whole section on eventing and hooks and tracking, which I don't believe is stabilized yet, but is like a newer addition to the specification. Any of those things are open for anyone to start working on, right? And if they seem like too big of a chunk to work on, you can at least get started on the issue and just be like, hey, I think I would like to look at this, but I either don't have the experience or I'm missing some of the blanks here for what these like open feature terms are and how we would actually implement this. And at least starting that conversation allows me as a maintainer and contributor to see it in my GitHub inbox and be like, okay, Andrew's interested in working on tracking in Ruby SDK. Then we can like set up some time, or we can have a Slack conversation in the CNCF Slack or get started. But you kind of just need to just start working a problem and be okay with the idea that maybe you don't ship it 100%, but maybe it is a forcing function for us to at least like break down the steps that we would need. And then maybe you do step 1, right? And you don't have time to do steps 2 through 7, but now we at least have those roadmapped and available. So like someone else doesn't have to feel as intimidated when they come and be like, oh, okay, now I just need to do step 2, right? I can do step 2. That's pretty easy, you know?
I love that.
Yeah, one thing to quickly add there is for some, especially for some of the new stuff, I'm trying to set this up in the org, but basically link all implementations to like one parent ticket. So if you're interested in say like the Ruby event tracker, which I know this one's actually set up because I just did it a few days ago, you could go to the parent ticket and then see other languages where it's been implemented. So you can kind of get an idea of like how to do it. You know, if you're comfortable with one language, try to port that functionality maybe to Ruby or something. So another way to kind of understand how the spec translates to real code.
Yeah, I use the JavaScript in what's the other one we look at? The Go one. And we when we were writing the Ruby SDK and like contributing the last couple of commits to get that released, those are heavily inspired by those two projects. So just kind of coming through, seeing how they did it. Yeah, so great opportunity there just to read code, right? And just understand how it's implemented somewhere else.
Love that. Love that. This is like I gotta tell you, like, I love that we just ended up having a chat about Ruby. It's inspired me to want to go and play around with the OpenFeature Ruby SDK. I'm gonna add that. It's gonna be my next Friday. My next Friday stream is gonna be, I'm gonna go and explore one of these Ruby and play around with our Ruby SDK a little bit more. It needs a second chance.
Yeah. And tomorrow night, just to plug my stream again, we're gonna be looking at the hooks implementation in the Ruby code. So we have kind of a couple of knobs there that kind of resemble hooks, but we don't have it fully implemented yet. And one of the things, like speaking about, upstreaming work from, our companies, at JustWorks, we need a logging hook, right? So we use Datadog. We would like to know when flags are evaluated, and we don't want to rebuild that every single time. So hooks are the open feature answer for that. And we can't currently use that in the Ruby SDK because it doesn't exist. So tomorrow night, our focus is going to be like hacking away at that, seeing if we can get something working, maybe not like fully spec compliant, but at least a way to pass a hook to the OpenFeature Ruby library and have it do something for you.
Love that. Love that. More contributions on the way. Max, where can folks find that stream?
Yeah, so that is twitch.tv/Max VelDink codes. I'll double check that link and send you a corrective one if I'm wrong. And then the easiest way to like keep up with me, honestly, it's like LinkedIn at this point because all the other social sites are just going bananas. But like you search Max VelDink on any platform, and if I come up, it's probably me. So LinkedIn is where I've been trying to post a little bit more about what I'm doing and some of the open source stuff that I'm focused on. So that's probably like the easiest second location.
Amazing. And what I'll do if you're watching this and catching this, there'll be descriptions there'll be links in the comments below after the stream if you want to check that out. Just so you know, if you're like, oh, I'd love to connect with Max, but also this Andrew and Mike characters seem like people that I'd like to connect with. Well, guess what? We are all in the same place on the internet. If you go and join the CNCF Slack, so if you just like kind of Google like Cloud Native Computing Foundation Slack community, again, the link will be in the description below if I remember. You can just look for the OpenFeature channels and you'll find Mike and Max and myself in there. And if you want to start having conversations about OpenFeature and Ruby or just Ruby, you can go to the OpenFeature, I think it's OpenFeature-Ruby or OpenFeature-Ruby SDK. Basically, join all the OpenFeature channels. And if there's not a language channel set up for you, create one or ask us to create one. And then there can be a space for you to have a conversation around that. All right, I'm going to pull us back up, all three of us on at the same time. So I think that we've kind of reached almost near the end of the hour, so I want to go and do kind of a final round. We'll end with you, Max, and start with me of kind of final thoughts from today's Contributor Spotlight Live. I think the highlight that I'm taking away from this is, why am I not using Ruby for every project that I'm doing? Forget Laravel, forget PHP, leave it behind and move over to the Ruby ecosystem. Because if nothing else, I now have someone to go and ask really simple questions to when ChatGPT can't answer it for me. Mike, big takeaway or final thoughts from today's Contributor Spotlight Live?
Yeah, I mean, kind of that, honestly. It was like, geez, like I've played around with Ruby, but just seeing Max's passion for it, it's like, it's something I should look at again, you know? So it's cool to see. Yeah, definitely appreciate, everything Max has done, and great to work with you. It was nice to meet you in person the one time. Hopefully it happens again. And excited for the hooks too. That'll be cool. And one thing to plug real quick. So if you're looking at telemetry, there is like a open telemetry working group right now trying to work on specifications for that. So something to maybe look forward to, and it could fit into the Ruby hooks eventually.
Yep, for sure. And I think don't sleep on Ruby would be a good takeaway out of any conversation with me, if you would like. Not to like steal people from other communities. All communities are great, and we all like push each other to build better software, and that's ultimately like the point, is to deliver Like for me, it's to deliver payroll software to small businesses so they can hire anyone anywhere, right? That's the point. But yeah, I guess that's my big thought. The smaller thought would be, please come help us on the Ruby SDK and OpenFeature if you would like. I would love to chat with anyone who's interested. Very, very straightforward Ruby project, not a huge time commitment to even get started. So I would love to talk to anyone who's interested in contributing.
Amazing. And speaking of things to not sleep on, if you cannot get enough OpenFeature and you are like needing more of this, but you want it live, and you've got a little bit of cash burning a hole in your pocket, and you're like, you know where I've always wanted to go? Salt Lake City, and you're free, I don't know, like mid-November. There just so happens to be a pretty cool event. The first ever OpenFeature Summit is happening as part of KubeCon, Cloud Native Con North America 2024 in just a couple weeks. Yours truly will be here emceeing the event. Mike will be there. We're gonna have some great talks on all of these topics. Max, I don't know if you're on the list this year, but for next year, Ruby plus
I am not.
OpenFeature.
We'll be there next year with a fully spec compliant Ruby SDK.
Hey, there we go. But be sure to check out all the information. Those talks will all be published afterwards, but show your love. Also share it out with the world. Let other people know that this is going on. And if you want to follow more about OpenFeature, you're probably finding this on YouTube through X or all of our other channels, but you can find us on all the places that you would expect to be able to find us. And most importantly, if you want to get started using the spec today, head over to openfeature.dev. And you can find all the information that we talked about today, links to all of the important stuff you need to get started adding feature flags to your OpenFeature compliant feature flags to your project today. So with that, from all of us to all of you who are watching, who check this out, thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you around the OpenFeature community. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Max.
Everyone.